Jordan to the Caribbean. In less than a year, we increased our purchases from some African countries by 1,000%. Didn't hurt the American economy, but it sure helped theirs. Same argument goes for education. In a poor country, and AIDS, keep in mind, is largely a poverty disease. In a poor country, 1 year of education is worth about 10% increase in income. There are 100 million kids who never go to school. Part of our problem in Afghanistan and in the Muslim world is all these kids who couldn't go to public school, so they went to madrasas where they were indoctrinated instead of educated. Because their parents, not because their parents were radical, their parents couldn't afford to send them to school. Now, we could send all these kids to school. Two examples. Brazil is the only poor country in the world that has 97% of its kids in school. You know how? They pay mothers, not fathers, mothers, in the poorest 30% of the families if they send their kids to school. Every month. Up to $45 a month. Increases the family income up to 30%, 97% going to school. Last year I got $300 million to provide a nutritious meal to children in school, but only if they would come to school to get it. You know how many people you can feed all year long in poor countries for $300 million? Over 6 million. And people, you ought to see where we've done this. Enrollments are exploding. People are coming in. We ought to send those kids to school. The same argument applies to health care. Kofi Annan just won the Nobel Peace Prize, richly deserved, for promoting peace. He knows if we have 100 million AIDS cases, we'll have more war. And he asked us for $10 billion to fight AIDS, TB, malaria, and other infectious diseases. America's share would be a little over $2 billion. Britain's share would be a little under $500 million. We ought to give it to him. Look, we can turn this AIDS thing around. It, to me, is the most frustrating of all problems. We're going to have medicine because of the South African drug case being settled. Uganda cut the AIDS death rate in half in 5 years with no medicine. Brazil cut it in half in 3 years with prevention and medicine. I have been in health clinics all over the world. I've seen kids in remote African villages doing plays to talk about AIDS, but I've also been in last year. AIDS has been around 20 years. Last year, I talked to world leaders who were friends of mine who told me they really couldn't talk about AIDS because, after all, there's all this cultural resistance. How many people have to die before your cultural resistance melts? So we ought to pay for it. Now, you can say to me, the same argument applies to global warming, except it's the only area we'll actually make money out of. There is a $1 trillion market today in alternative energy sources and presently available energy conservation technologies that will create jobs in Europe, in America, in the developing world, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're being hurt by denial there. Now, but the other stuff will cost money. It will cost money. But I can tell you this, it's a lot cheaper than going to war. We will spend far more to pick up the pieces of destroyed lands and shattered lives if we do not do these things. We will spend much more. America's spending about $1 billion a month in Afghanistan. That's as cheap as a war gets. We'll never fight a conflict for less than $1 billion a month. For $12 billion a year, we could pay America's share of all those initiatives I just mentioned and have money left over. So I urge you to think about that. The next point I want to make very briefly is that we can do all these things, and there are some countries in which it will make no difference. There are changes that poor countries have to make within that make progress possible. For example, it's no accident that most of these terrorists come from countries that aren't democracies. If you never get to take responsibility for yourself, and you're never required to take responsibility for yourself, then countries are like people. You're kept in sort of a state of permanent immaturity, where it's quite easy to convince you that your distress is caused by someone else's success. It's no accident that Jordan is the most stable country in the inner Middle East. 10 years ago, King Hussein basically made a social compact with all elements of society, including fundamentalist Muslims. And he said, here are the powers I will give up. Here are the powers the parliament will get. Anybody can run, anybody can serve, but here's what you cannot do to destroy the fundamental character of our society. And it has worked. So here's a country that's majority Palestinian, quite poor, quite young, and in a dicey position geographically, still chugging along, partly because the people have some way of taking responsibility for themselves. Same thing is true in Iran. The government's very anti-Western, but the people aren't, in part because they have real elections and real votes. And the only time their real democracy is thwarted is when their own people do it, so they don't blame us. So we should be advancing democracy and human rights. And once a country makes a decision to be more open and free, we should help them be more successful. Elections are only part of the job. And finally, we have to be in this debate in the Muslim world. I think we have demonstrated that America is not the enemy of Islam. I was the first president ever to recognize the feast of Eid al-Fitr every single year at the end of Ramadan, to bring in large numbers of Muslims to consult in the White House. One of the best things President Bush has done in this whole mess is to go almost immediately to a mosque and meet with Muslim leaders after September the 11th, and then to break the fast of Ramadan in the White House with a meal, to illustrate that we have 6 million Muslims in America who are pursuing their faith and doing well. But most Muslims in the rest of the world don't know it. There's some other things they don't know. They don't know 500 Muslims died on September the 11th, a direct violation of the Quran and Sharia law, to deliberately kill other Muslims. They do not know that the last time the United Kingdom and America used military authority was to protect the lives of poor Muslims in Bosnia and Kosovo. They do not know when 18 American soldiers died in 1993 in Somalia. In that raid, Mr. bin Laden loves to brag about. He brags about how he helped train the Somalis to kill the Americans. But he never tells you their community. You have to look like them, think like them, and act like them. And they know people will stray every now and then, so they pick a few people to beat the living daylights out of those who stray. Now, most of us believe that no one has the absolute truth. Indeed, in our societies, the most religious among us sometimes feel that most strongly. Because we believe as children of God, we are by definition limited in this life, in this body, with our minds. That life is a journey toward truth, that we have something to learn from each other, and that everybody ought to have a chance to make the journey. So for us, a community is just made up of anybody that accepts the rules of the game. Everybody counts, everybody has a role to play, everybody deserves a chance, and we all do better when we work together. Now, that's what this is about. This is not complicated. The people that want to kill us over our differences do so because they think their life doesn't matter, except insofar as they are different from and better than others. Those of us who are trying to change ourselves and change them, we think our common humanity is more important, and if we could just live up to its potential, the world would be a better place.